Welcome to Chapter 18 on Neural Control and Coordination. This is a very important chapter. We will be learning about how our nervous system organizes and controls all the different functions of our body. Pay close attention because this chapter builds the foundation for understanding how we think, feel, and respond to our environment, isn't it? So basically, we have 5 main sections to cover. First, we will understand what the neural system is and how it has evolved in different animals. Then we will focus specifically on the human neural system and how it is organized. After that, we will study the neuron in detail because the neuron is the basic functional unit. Then comes the central neural system, which includes the brain and spinal cord. Finally, we will study how nerve impulses are generated and transmitted from one neuron to another. Clear? So what is coordination? Coordination is basically the process through which two or more organs interact and complement the functions of one another. Think about it. Every system in your body does not work independently. Everything is connected and must work together in a synchronized fashion. This is coordination. Now let me give you a practical example. When we do physical exercises, what happens? First, the energy demand is increased because we are using our muscles more, right? So the body needs more oxygen. This increased oxygen demand means the respiratory system must work harder. You breathe faster, your heart beats faster, and more blood flows through your blood vessels to deliver oxygen to the muscles. Simple, isn't it? But here's the interesting part. When you stop exercising, what happens? Slowly and gradually, everything comes back to normal. Your breathing slows down, your heartbeat comes back to normal, the blood flow decreases, everything returns to its normal rate. This gradual return shows that all these systems are working together in a coordinated way. So which organs are involved in this coordination? We have muscles that are contracting, lungs that are breathing faster, the heart that is beating faster, blood vessels that are dilating to allow more blood flow, kidneys that are adjusting water and salt balance, and many other organs. All of them work together in perfect coordination. This is the beauty of our body system. The key concept here is that coordination is not just about individual organs doing their job, it is about all organs doing their job in a synchronized, integrated manner to maintain the internal balance of the body. We call this maintaining homeostasis. This is essential for survival. Now, you need to understand that our body has two systems that handle all this coordination. One is the neural system and the other is the endocrine system. Both work together to coordinate and integrate all the activities of the organs so that they function in a synchronized fashion. Tell me, have you thought about how these two systems work differently? The neural system, provides an organized network of point-to-point connections for very quick coordination. It's like having a telephone system where signals travel directly from one point to another through wires. The neural system uses electrical impulses that travel along nerve fibers. This is very fast. When you touch something hot and pull your hand away immediately, that's the neural system working. It's instant, right? The endocrine system, on the other hand, provides chemical integration through hormones. Hormones are chemical substances that are released into the bloodstream and then travel throughout the body to reach their target organs. These hormones have longer lasting effects compared to neural signals, but they are slower. For example, when you eat a lot of sugar, your pancreas releases insulin, which affects your blood glucose levels over time. This is endocrine coordination. Now let's talk about how the neural system has evolved in different animals. In very simple organisms like Hydra, the neural system is very basic. It consists just of a network of neurons scattered throughout the body. There is no central organization. It's like having communication lines everywhere but no central control room. So Hydra can only do very simple things. When we look at insects, the neural system is better organized, no? Insects have a brain, yes, a real brain. And along with this brain, they have a number of ganglia, which are clusters of nerve cells and neural tissues. So the organization is more centralized. This allows insects to do more complex things nosy. They can fly, find food, avoid predators, and even communicate with each other. But when we come to vertebrates, fish, birds, mammals, and yes, humans, we have a much more developed neural system. We have a large complex brain with billions of neurons organized into different regions, each with specialized functions. The vertebrate nervous system is the most sophisticated in the animal kingdom. It allows us to think, learn, remember, feel emotions, and engage in complex social behaviors. Isn't that amazing? So the pattern is clear, isn't it? As we go from simple invertebrates to complex vertebrates, the neural system becomes increasingly centralized, organized, and complex. This evolution of the nervous system has allowed organisms to become more sophisticated in their behaviors, more capable of learning and remembering, and better adapted to their environments. This is the power of neural evolution. Right. So now let's focus on the human nervous system specifically. The human neural system is divided into two main parts. First is the central nervous system, which we call CNS. Second is the peripheral nervous system, which we call PNS. These two work together to control everything in your body. The CNS consists of the brain and the spinal cord. Think of the CNS as the control center of your body, like the head office of a company. This is where all information is received, processed, and decisions are made. The brain and spinal cord work together to process all the sensory information and send out commands to the rest of the body. The PNS, on the other hand, comprises all the nerves of the body that are associated with the CNS. Think of PNS as the communication network or the branches of the company. All the nerves spread throughout your body are part of the PNS. These nerves carry signals to and from the CNS, connecting your muscles, organs, and sensory receptors to the control center. So basically, what happens is this sensory information from your body and the environment is collected by the PNS nerves and sent to the CNS. The CNS processes this information. Then the CNS sends commands back through the PNS to your muscles and organs. The PNS implements these commands. This back and forth communication is how your nervous system works. Simple, isn't it? Now, the nerve fibers in the PNS are of two types. One is afferent fibers and the other is efferent fibers. These two types work together to create a communication system between your body and your CNS. Imagine it like a two-way road system, no? Afferent nerve fibers are sensory fibers. They transmit impulses from your tissues and organs to the CNS. So when you touch something, when you feel hot or cold, when you feel pain, or when you sense the position of your body, all this sensory information travels through afferent fibers to your brain and spinal cord. These are like the incoming roads bringing messages to the control center. Efferent nerve fibers are motor fibers. They transmit regulatory impulses from the CNS to the concerned peripheral tissues and organs. So when your brain decides to move your hand or when your nervous system wants to increase your heart rate, these commands travel through efferent fibers to your muscles and organs. These are like the outgoing roads carrying commands from the control center to execute actions. Now, the PNS is further divided into two divisions. One is the somatic neural system and the other is the autonomic neural system. They are divided based on what they control and whether the control is voluntary or involuntary. Clear? The somatic neural system relays impulses from the CNS to your skeletal muscles. This system is under your conscious control. When you decide to walk, to move your hand, to write, or to do any other movement that you consciously control, that's the somatic nervous system at work. You have direct voluntary control over it. The autonomic neural system, on the other hand, transmits impulses from the CNS to the involuntary organs and smooth muscles of the body. This system is not under your conscious control. It controls things like your heartbeat, your breathing at rest, digestion, blood pressure, all the things happening in your body that you are not thinking about. You do not have direct conscious control over these. The autonomic neural system is further classified into the sympathetic neural system and the parasympathetic neural system. These two work in opposite ways to maintain the balance in your body. The sympathetic system activates your body during stress or exercise, while the parasympathetic system calms your body down during rest. We will learn more about these later. There is also something called the visceral nervous system. This is the part of the peripheral nervous system that comprises a whole complex network of nerves, fibers, ganglia, and plexuses. These send impulses from the CNS to your internal organs and also bring information back from your internal organs to the CNS. This is basically part of the autonomic system, but it has its own special name. Now let's study the neuron in detail, because the neuron is the basic structural and functional unit of the neural system. Every neuron is a microscopic structure that has three major parts. Can you guess what they are? They are the cell body, the dendrites, and the axon. Each part has a specific function, and together they make the neuron capable of receiving, processing, and transmitting signals. The cell body, also called the soma, is basically like the main body of the neuron. It contains the nucleus and the cytoplasm with typical cell organelles. Inside the cytoplasm, you will find something called Nessel's granules. These are granular bodies that look like they are speckled or spotted. They are very important for the neuron's function. From the cell body, short fibers branch out repeatedly in all directions. These are called dendrites. Think of them like the branches of a tree spreading out from the trunk. The reason they branch so much is to increase the surface area so that the neuron can receive signals from many other neurons at the same time. Now here's an interesting thing. Dendrites also contain Nessel's granules, just like the cell body. This means dendrites can also synthesize proteins locally. This is useful because the dendritic branches can produce proteins right there without waiting for the cell body to make them and send them. Very efficient system, right? The main function of dendrites is to transmit impulses toward the cell body. So signals come from other neurons and are collected by the dendrites and brought toward the cell body for processing. Since one neuron can have multiple dendrites, it can receive signals from many different neurons at the same time. This allows the neuron to integrate information from multiple sources before generating its own response. Now from the cell body, there is also one very long fiber called the axon. If dendrites are like the receiving branches of a tree, the axon is like the trunk from which a message travels away. The axon is much longer than the dendrites and can reach from your spinal cord all the way down to your toes. That's how long some axons can be. At the end of the axon, that is, the part farthest from the cell body meet, the axon branches into multiple branches. This branching at the terminal end allows one neuron to communicate with many other neurons or with muscle cells. Each of these branches terminates in a very small bulb-like structure. Can you imagine how small this must be? This bulb-like structure at the end is called the synaptic knob or synaptic terminal. Inside the synaptic knob, there are many small sacs called synaptic vesicles. These vesicles are filled with chemicals called neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are the chemical messengers that allow neurons to communicate with each other. We will study these in detail later. The main function of the axon is to transmit nerve impulses away from the cell body. The axon is specialized for this purpose. It is long, thin, and continuous, making it ideal for transmitting signals over long distances. The axon can reach a synapse with another neuron, or it can reach a neuromuscular junction where it connects with a muscle cell. So basically, the dendrite receives signals, the cell body processes them, and the axon sends the processed signal onward to the next neuron or to a muscle. Now, neurons are classified into different types based on how many axons and dendrites they have. This classification is very important because the structure of a neuron tells us a lot about where it is found and what it does. There are three main types of neurons based on their morphology. The first type is multipolar neurons. These neurons have one axon and two or more dendrites. This is the most common type of neuron in your body. In fact, most of the neurons in your brain and spinal cord are multipolar neurons. They are especially abundant in the cerebral cortex, which is the outer layer of your brain where thinking happens. Because they have multiple dendrites, they can receive inputs from many different neurons and integrate all that information. Very useful for complex thinking, isn't it? The second type is bipolar neurons. These neurons have one axon and one dendrite. So they are more simplified compared to multipolar neurons. They are relatively rare in the body, but where are they found? They are found in sensory organs, particularly in the retina of the eye. In the eye, they act as interneurons, connecting the light-sensitive cells to the neurons that send information to the brain. The third type is unipolar neurons. These neurons have a cell body with just one axon. They do not have dendrites. This type of neuron is mainly found in the embryonic stage mu, that is, during the development of the organism in the womb. As the organism develops, many unipolar neurons disappear. In mature organisms, unipolar neurons are very rare, though some may be found in certain sensory systems. Now, there are two types of axons, myelinated and unmyelinated. The main difference between them is that myelinated axons have an insulating covering, while unmyelinated axons do not. This difference in structure causes them to conduct signals at different speeds. Let's study myelinated axons first. Myelinated nerve fibers are axons that are covered with a thick insulating layer called the myelin sheath. This myelin sheath is formed by specialized cells called Schwann cells. What these Schwann cells do is they wrap around the axon many times, creating thick layers of insulating material. This insulating material is fatty and prevents electrical charges from leaking out of the axon. Think of it like an electrical wire covered with rubber insulation, no? But here's the interesting thing. The myelin sheath is not continuous along the entire axon. There are small gaps between adjacent myelin sheaths. These gaps are called nodes of Ranvier. At these nodes, the axon membrane is exposed and not covered by myelin. These nodes are very small, about 1 micrometer apart. It is at these nodes that the action potential is regenerated as the nerve impulse travels along the axon. Myelinated nerve fibers are found in the spinal nerves and cranial nerves, which are part of your peripheral nervous system. Because of the myelin insulation and the nodes of Ranvier, myelinated fibers conduct nerve impulses much faster than unmyelinated fibers. This increased speed is very important. It allows you to react quickly to danger or to painful stimuli. This is why reflexes are so fast, isn't it? Unmyelinated nerve fibers, on the other hand, do not have the thick insulating myelin sheath. These fibers are also associated with Schwann cells, but the Schwann cells do not wrap around them many times like they do for myelinated fibers. Instead, multiple unmyelinated axons may be embedded in grooves within a single Schwann cell, so the insulation is minimal or even absent in many places. Because unmyelinated fibers lack proper insulation, ion channels are exposed along most of the axon length. This means ions can leak across the membrane more easily. The action potential must be regenerated along the entire length of the axon, not just at the nodes like in myelinated fibers. This makes conduction much slower in unmyelinated fibers compared to myelinated fibers. The unmyelinated fiber has to do more work to conduct the signal along its entire length. Unmyelinated nerve fibers are commonly found in the autonomic nervous system and the somatic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system controls involuntary functions like your heartbeat and digestion. The somatic nervous system controls your voluntary muscles. For these functions, the slower conduction speed of unmyelinated fibers is actually acceptable because these functions do not need the super fast response times that reflexes require. So unmyelinated fibers are perfectly suited for their role. Now let's understand why neurons can generate and transmit electrical signals. Neurons are called excitable cells. What does excitable mean? It means that neurons can respond to stimuli by generating electrical signals called action potentials. But why can neurons do this? The answer is that the neural membrane is in a polarized state. What does polarized mean? It means there is an electrical charge difference across the membrane. So how is this polarization maintained? The answer involves ion channels. Ion channels are protein structures that form tiny pores through the neural membrane. These pores allow ions to move across the membrane. There are different types of ion channels in the neural membrane, and each type has a specific purpose. The key characteristic of ion channels is that they are selectively permeable. This means that each type of ion channel allows only specific ions to pass through. For example, potassium channels allow potassium ions to pass through but block sodium ions. Sodium channels do the opposite. They allow sodium ions but block potassium ions. This selective permeability is very important because it allows the neuron to create and maintain concentration gradients of different ions. These gradients are what make neuronal signaling possible. Simple, isn't it? When a neuron is at rest, that is, when it is not conducting any impulse, the axonal membrane has different permeability to different ions. The membrane is comparatively more permeable to potassium ions. This means potassium ions can pass through the membrane relatively easily, but the membrane is nearly impermeable to sodium ions. Sodium ions cannot pass through the membrane easily. This difference in permeability is very important. Another important fact is that the membrane is impermeable to negatively charged proteins that are present inside the axon. These proteins are too large to pass through the membrane, and the membrane has specific mechanisms to keep them inside. These proteins cannot escape from the axon. This is important because these proteins contribute to the negative charge inside the axon. So what is the result? Inside the axon, we have high concentration of potassium ions and low concentration of sodium ions. We also have high concentration of negatively charged proteins. This uneven distribution of ions inside the axon is maintained by active processes in the cell. This distribution is what allows the neuron to generate action potentials. To summarize the inside of the axon, there is very high potassium, very low sodium, and many negative proteins. This creates what we call an electrical gradient because the inside is negatively charged compared to the outside. The inside of the axon is like the negative terminal of a battery, while the outside is like the positive terminal. This uneven distribution of ions inside and outside the axon is maintained by active transport processes in the cell. This is not a passive process. The cell must use energy to maintain these gradients. But it is worth the energy because these ion gradients are absolutely essential for neural signaling. Without these gradients, neurons could not generate action potentials and could not communicate with each other. Outside the axon, in the extracellular fluid, the situation is exactly opposite to what we have inside. Outside the axon, the concentration of potassium ions is very low, but the concentration of sodium ions is very high. So we have low potassium outside and high sodium outside. This is opposite to what we have inside. This creates what we call a concentration gradient. Because of this concentration gradient, sodium ions naturally want to move from outside to inside the axon, following the concentration gradient. Similarly, potassium ions naturally want to move from inside to outside. If we just let this happen passively, the ions would move until their concentrations were equal on both sides. But that's not what happens. The neuron actively maintains these gradients. How does the neuron maintain these gradients? Through a special protein pump called the sodium-potassium pump. This pump uses energy from ATP, which is the energy currency of the cell. The sodium-potassium pump is an active transport mechanism, meaning it uses energy to move ions against their concentration gradients. What it does is, it pumps 3 sodium ions outward for every 2 potassium ions it brings inward. This is not a fair exchange of ions, but it is very important for the neuron. Because the pump moves 3 ions out for every 2 ions in, there is a net movement of positive charge out of the cell. 3 positive sodiums leave, but only 2 positive potassiums enter. So the net effect is that the inside of the cell becomes more negative and the outside becomes more positive. This pumping action is continuous and requires a lot of energy. In fact, the sodium-potassium pump uses about 30% of all the ATP energy produced by the cell. That shows how important it is. So we have established that the inside of the axon is negative and the outside is positive. This electrical potential difference has a name. It is called the resting potential. The resting potential is the electrical potential difference across the resting plasma membrane. When the neuron is at rest and not conducting any impulse, this potential difference is stable and constant. The resting potential is typically around negative 70 millivolts. That means the inside is about 70 millivolts more negative than the outside. The resting potential is created and maintained by several factors working together. First, the unequal distribution of ions high potassium inside, high sodium outside. Second, the sodium-potassium pump actively maintaining this gradient. Third, the selective permeability of the membrane to different ions. And fourth, the presence of large protein molecules inside the axon that cannot cross the membrane. All these factors together create and maintain the resting potential. So the outer surface of the axonal membrane is positively charged. Why? Because sodium ions are positively charged and they are in high concentration outside. Also, because potassium ions are positively charged but are in low concentration outside. The positive charge on the outside is a key part of the resting potential. The inner surface of the axonal membrane is negatively charged. Why? First, because the large protein molecules inside the axon are negatively charged and they are trapped inside where they contribute to the negative charge. Second, because there is an excess of potassium ions inside and while potassium itself is positively charged, the deficit of sodium inside means there are relatively more negative ions. The net effect is a negative charge on the inside. When we say the membrane is polarized, we mean exactly this. There is a charge separation. The outside is positive and the inside is negative. This polarized state means there is potential energy stored in the membrane, like a battery. When a stimulus arrives, the neuron can use this stored energy to generate an action potential and transmit a signal. The resting potential is absolutely essential for the neuron to work. Without a resting potential, a neuron cannot generate an action potential. Without an action potential, a neuron cannot transmit signals. So the resting potential is the foundation of all neural communication. It must be maintained at all times for the neuron to function properly. Now let's understand what happens when a neuron receives a stimulus. When a stimulus is applied at a particular site on the polarized membrane plates, call this site A, something very important happens. The membrane at that site undergoes rapid changes in its permeability to ions. Specifically, the membrane becomes freely permeable to sodium ions. How? Voltage-gated sodium channels in the membrane open in response to the stimulus. When these channels open, they create pores in the membrane that allow sodium ions to flow through. Before the stimulus, these channels were closed. After the stimulus, they suddenly open. Once the sodium channels open, sodium ions, which remember are in very high concentration outside the axon, suddenly have a pathway to get inside. They rush in following both the concentration gradient from high concentration outside to low concentration inside, might say, and the electrical gradient, positive charges moving toward the negatively charged inside. This influx of sodium is rapid and massive. In just a fraction of a millisecond, many sodium ions flow into the axon. What is the consequence of this massive sodium influx? The inside of the axon, which was very negative, suddenly fills with positively charged sodium ions. These positive charges neutralize the negative charges that were inside. More than that, they actually exceed the negative charges and make the inside become positive. This complete reversal of the membrane polarity is called depolarization. At the resting state, remember the inside was negative and the outside was positive. Now, after sodium influx, the inside is positive and the outside is negative. The potential has reversed. We say the membrane is depolarized because the potential difference between inside and outside has been dramatically reduced and even reversed. So we have established that at the site of stimulation, the membrane polarity has been reversed. The outer surface is now negatively charged and the inner surface is now positively charged. This depolarized state is what we are going to study now. The electrical potential difference that develops across the plasma membrane at this depolarized site is called the action potential. Or we can say it another way. The action potential is the depolarized state of the membrane at a stimulated site. The action potential is the fundamental electrical signal that neurons use for communication. In fact, we often use the terms action potential and nerve impulse interchangeably. A nerve impulse is basically an action potential. It's the electrical signal that travels along the axon. The action potential has some important characteristics. First, it develops very rapidly in just 1 to 2 milliseconds. Second, it is an all or nothing response. Either the stimulus is strong enough to generate a full action potential or it is not. There is no in between. The action potential can swing from about negative 70 millivolts at rest to positive 30 millivolts or even higher at its peak. That's a complete change of 100 millivolts. This is a dramatic reversal of the membrane state. So now we have a situation at the site of stimulation. Let's call it site A, where the membrane is depolarized. The inside is positive and the outside is negative. But immediately next to this site A, let's call the adjacent site B. The membrane is still in its original polarized state. The inside is still negative and the outside is still positive. This creates an electrical difference between site A and site B. The neuron does not like imbalances. It wants to equalize them. So what happens? Current flows. On the inner surface of the membrane, electrical current flows from site A towards site B. This current is actually the movement of positive ions inside the axon, flowing from where there are many positive ions at site A toward where there are fewer positive ions at site B. This current flow brings positive charge to site B. At the same time, on the outer surface of the membrane, current flows in the opposite direction. Current flows from site B back towards site A. This current flow on the outer surface is necessary to complete the circuit. Think of it like water flowing in a circle. Inside it flows one way, outside it flows the other way, and the circuit is complete. As a result of this current flow, the membrane at site B becomes depolarized. The current flow brings positive charges to the inside of site B and removes positive charges from the outside. This reverses the polarity of the membrane at site B, just like it was reversed at site A. Now site B is depolarized and has an action potential. Now site B has been depolarized and has its own action potential. So the same thing that happened between site A and B now happens between site B and site C. The depolarized site B generates current that flows to the adjacent polarized site C. And then site C gets depolarized and generates its own action potential. Then D gets depolarized and E and F and so on. This sequence repeats again and again along the entire length of the axon. It's like a wave. The depolarized state moves along the axon like a wave moving along the surface of water. This sequence repeats along the entire length of the axon. The impulse travels from the point of stimulation all the way to the terminal end of the axon where it meets the next neuron. And here's the beautiful part. This is a self-propagating system. Once it starts, it continues on its own without needing additional stimulation. The impulse does not get weaker as it travels. It maintains its strength all the way along the axon. The speed at which this wave travels varies. In thin, unmyelinated fibers, it travels slowly, maybe 1 meter per second. In thick myelinated fibers, it can travel very fast, up to 100 meters per second. The reason is that the myelin sheath insulates the axon, preventing ion leakage. This allows the current to flow a longer distance along the axon before depolarizing the next region. That's why myelinated fibers conduct so much faster than unmyelinated fibers. So depolarization happens because sodium channels open and sodium rushes in. But this phase does not last long. The rise in sodium permeability is extremely brief. It lasts only for a fraction of a millisecond. The sodium channels open very quickly in response to the stimulus, but then they immediately close again. This closing is called inactivation. The channels become inactivated, meaning they cannot reopen immediately. At almost the same time that sodium channels close, potassium channels open. These are voltage-gated potassium channels that respond to the depolarization. When they open, they create pores in the membrane that allow potassium ions to escape from inside the axon to the outside. Remember, potassium is in very high concentration inside and low concentration outside. So potassium ions are very eager to flow out following the concentration gradient. So potassium ions flow out. When they do, they take their positive charge with them. The inside of the axon, which had just become positive from the sodium influx, now loses these positive potassium ions. The inside becomes negative again. The resting potential is restored. This process is called repolarization. The membrane is becoming polarized again. All this happens very fast. Within just a fraction of a second after potassium channels open, the resting potential is fully restored. The membrane returns to its original polarized state, inside negative, outside positive. And then the neuron is ready to respond to the next stimulus. If another stimulus comes, it can generate another action potential. This cycle can repeat many times per second, which is how neurons can transmit rapid sequences of signals. Now we come to a very important concept, the synapse. A synapse is the functional junction between two neurons. It's basically the connection point where one neuron communicates with another neuron. The synapse is where a signal generated in one neuron is transferred to the next neuron. This is crucial for the nervous system to work because neurons need to communicate with each other, and the synapse is how they do it. There are two main types of synapses, electrical synapses and chemical synapses. They are different in how they are structured and how they work. Let's learn about both of them. In electrical synapses, the membranes of the presynaptic and postsynaptic neurons are in very close proximity. The gap between them is extremely small, no? Just a few nanometers. Bridging this small gap are protein structures called connexins, which form gap junctions. These gap junctions are essentially channels that connect the insides of the two neurons. Because these gap junctions create direct channels between the neurons, electrical current can flow directly from the presynaptic neuron into the postsynaptic neuron. Positive ions from the presynaptic neuron flow through the gap junctions into the postsynaptic neuron. This is direct electrical transmission. There are no chemical messengers involved. It is very direct and straightforward. The transmission of a nerve impulse across an electrical synapse is very similar to the conduction of a nerve impulse along a single axon. The current flow depolarizes the postsynaptic membrane just like we discussed earlier with current flow along an axon. The process is direct and does not involve any complicated steps. Because electrical synapses allow direct current flow with no chemical intermediates, they are very fast. Impulse transmission across an electrical synapse is always faster than transmission across a chemical synapse. This speed advantage makes electrical synapses ideal for situations where very rapid, coordinated responses are needed, like coordinated contractions of cardiac muscle. However, electrical synapses are relatively rare in the human nervous system. They are found in cardiac muscle, where they ensure that all the heart muscle cells contract together in a coordinated way. They are also found in smooth muscle and in certain parts of the brain. But most of the synapses in the nervous system are not electrical synapses. Most are chemical synapses, which we will study
Chemical
next. Synapses are different from electrical synapses. In a chemical synapse, the membranes of the presynaptic and postsynaptic neurons are separated by a distinct space. This space is filled with fluid and is called the synaptic cleft. The synaptic cleft is quite large, about 20 to 40 nanometers across. This gap is much bigger than the gap in electrical synapses. Because of this gap, electrical current cannot flow directly from one neuron to the other. So how does signal transmission occur? Through chemicals. The solution is to use chemical messengers called neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are chemicals that are made by the presynaptic neuron and are released into the synaptic cleft. They diffuse across the synaptic cleft and then bind to receptor proteins on the postsynaptic neuron. This binding causes a response in the postsynaptic neuron, so the signal is transmitted not by electricity but by chemicals. Where are these neurotransmitters stored? In the axon terminal of the presynaptic neuron, there are many small sacs called synaptic vesicles. Each vesicle is like a little bag filled with neurotransmitter molecules. When the action potential arrives at the axon terminal, these vesicles release their neurotransmitter contents into the synaptic cleft. The vesicles fuse with the presynaptic membrane and spill their contents out. Now, what triggers the release of neurotransmitters? The answer is the action potential. When an action potential travels along the axon and reaches the axon terminal, the synaptic knob bands. It causes depolarization of the presynaptic membrane at the terminal. This depolarization opens voltage-gated calcium channels in the presynaptic membrane. Calcium ions, which are in high concentration outside the cell, suddenly have a pathway to enter. They rush into the axon terminal. The influx of calcium ions into the presynaptic terminal is the critical trigger. It is the signal that says release neurotransmitters now. The influx of calcium stimulates the synaptic vesicles to move toward the presynaptic membrane. The vesicles dock and fuse with the neuronal membrane. This fusing process is called exocytosis. When exocytosis occurs, the membrane of the synaptic vesicle becomes continuous with the neuronal membrane. The two membranes merge together. When the vesicle membrane and the neuronal membrane merge, the contents of the vesicle are released. The neurotransmitter molecules that were stored inside the vesicle are now released into the synaptic cleft. This happens very quickly in just a fraction of a millisecond. The entire process from action potential arrival to neurotransmitter release is extremely rapid. That's why our nervous system works so fast. Once neurotransmitters are released into the synaptic cleft, they diffuse across the cleft toward the postsynaptic membrane. On the postsynaptic membrane, there are receptor proteins. These receptors are very specific. Each receptor type binds to a specific neurotransmitter. It's like a lock and key system. The right neurotransmitter fits into its specific receptor like a key fits into a lock. When a neurotransmitter binds to its receptor, the receptor protein changes shape. This shape change opens ion channels associated with the receptor. So now ions can flow through the postsynaptic membrane. Different receptors are associated with different ion channels. Some allow sodium in, some allow potassium out, and so on. The flow of ions through these channels changes the membrane potential of the postsynaptic neuron. If positive ions flow into the postsynaptic cell, the inside becomes less negative or even positive. This is called depolarization of the postsynaptic membrane. If positive ions flow out of the postsynaptic cell, the inside becomes more negative. This is called hyperpolarization. So the new potential that develops in the postsynaptic neuron can be either excitatory or inhibitory. If the potential is depolarizing, making the inside less negative, then it is excitatory. It makes the postsynaptic neuron more likely to generate an action potential and fire. If the potential is hyperpolarizing, making the inside more negative, then it is inhibitory. It makes the postsynaptic neuron less likely to fire. The postsynaptic neuron receives many synaptic inputs and integrates all of them together to decide whether to fire or not. This is how neural circuits make decisions. Now let's talk about the brain. The brain is truly the most important organ in your body. It is the central information processing organ and acts as the command and control center for your entire body. Everything that happens in your body is controlled by or influenced by your brain. Your brain receives information from all over your body, processes that information, and then sends out commands to your muscles and organs. First, the brain controls all your voluntary movements. When you decide to move your hand or walk or write or talk, that decision originates in your brain. Your brain sends commands through your spinal cord and nerves to your muscles, causing them to contract in a coordinated way. You have direct conscious control over these movements. The brain also maintains your balance. It coordinates complex movement patterns so that you do not fall when you walk or stand. Even when you are standing still, your brain is continuously making tiny adjustments to keep you balanced. This happens automatically without you thinking about it. But the brain also controls many involuntary functions that you do not think about. Your brain controls your lungs and makes you breathe. It controls your heart and makes it beat. It controls your kidneys and your digestive system. These are automatic processes that continue even when you are asleep or not thinking about them. The brain regulates your body temperature. It works hard to keep your body temperature at about 37 degrees Celsius. When you are too hot, your brain makes you sweat to cool down. When you are too cold, your brain makes you shiver to generate heat. This temperature regulation is essential for your survival. The brain also creates the feeling of hunger and thirst. When your body needs food, your brain sends a signal that makes you feel hungry. When your body needs water, your brain makes you feel thirsty. These sensations drive you to eat and drink, which is essential for survival. Your brain maintains what is called circadian rhythms. These are 24-hour biological cycles that control many aspects of your physiology. Your brain controls your sleep-wake cycle, making you sleepy at night and alert during the day. It also controls daily fluctuations in hormone levels and body temperature. All of this is coordinated by your brain's internal clock. The brain also coordinates the activities of several endocrine glands, which are glands that release hormones. The brain tells these glands when to release hormones and in what amounts. This allows the nervous system and endocrine system to work together in perfect coordination. Perhaps most importantly, the brain is the seat of your behavior. It is what makes you who you are. Your brain generates your consciousness, your decisions, your personality, your social interactions. Your behavior reflects what is happening. The brain is also the site where all sensory information is processed. When light enters your eyes, it creates signals that travel to your brain. Your brain processes these signals and creates the conscious perception of vision. You see colors, you perceive depth, you recognize objects and faces. All of this is happening in your brain. Similarly, when sound waves enter your ears, they create signals that travel to your brain. Your brain processes these signals and creates the conscious perception of hearing. You hear speech, music, and environmental sounds. Your brain can even tell where a sound is coming from. Your brain also processes smell. When odor molecules enter your nose, they create signals that go to your brain. Your brain interprets these signals as different smells. This is why you can recognize the smell of flowers or food or different people. Your brain produces speech. When you talk, your brain is generating the words, selecting the ideas you want to express, and coordinating the muscles of your mouth and throat to produce the sounds. Speech is a very complex function that involves many different brain regions working together. The brain is the site of memory. Everything you remember, your experiences, facts you have learned, skills you have acquired, these are all stored in your brain. Your brain is continuously forming new memories and retrieving old ones. Memory is essential for learning and for functioning in daily life. The brain generates intelligence. Intelligence is your ability to think, to solve problems, to understand abstract concepts, and to reason logically. Intelligence allows humans to create science, technology, art, and culture. It is what sets us apart from other animals. The brain generates emotions. When you feel happy, sad, afraid, or angry, these are all emotions being generated by your brain. Emotions are not just feelings, they involve physiological changes too. When you are afraid, your heart beats faster and your palms sweat because your brain is triggering these physiological responses. The brain is very delicate and must be protected. The first line of protection is the skull. The skull is made of hard bone and completely surrounds and encloses the brain. When you feel the top of your head, you are feeling your skull. It provides a rigid protective case around your brain. But that is not all. Inside the skull, beneath it, the brain is covered by protective membranes. These membranes are called the cranial meninges. There are 3 layers of meninges and they provide additional protection for the brain. The outermost layer of the meninges is called the dura mater. It is a thick, tough membrane made of dense connective tissue. The dura mater is like a heavy-duty protective jacket around the brain. It provides strong mechanical protection against blows and impacts. The middle layer is called the arachnoid membrane. It is a very thin, delicate membrane. Between the dura mater and the arachnoid is a thin space. Below the arachnoid is a larger space called the subarachnoid space. The innermost layer of the meninges is called the pia mater. It is in direct contact with the brain tissue itself. The pia mater is very delicate and follows the contours of the brain closely. It adheres directly to the surface of the brain. Now let's divide the brain into its major parts. The brain can be divided into 3 major regions based on how the brain develops before birth. These are the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. Each region has different structures and different functions. The forebrain is the most forward or anterior part of the brain. It is also the largest part of the brain in humans. The forebrain consists of 3 main components. First is the cerebrum, which is the very largest part of the brain. We will study the cerebrum in detail. Second is the thalamus, which acts as a relay station for sensory information. Third is the hypothalamus, which controls many homeostatic functions like temperature, hunger, and thirst. The cerebrum is the most important part of the brain. It is absolutely huge. It makes up about 85% of the entire brain. The cerebrum is where all your thinking happens. It is the site of consciousness, voluntary control, and all your higher mental functions like thinking, learning, and reasoning. The cerebrum is not a single structure. It is divided into 2 halves by a deep cleft running from front to back. These 2 halves are called the left and right cerebral hemispheres. They are similar in structure, but they have some different functions. For example, the left hemisphere usually handles language, while the right hemisphere usually handles spatial relationships. The 2 hemispheres are connected by a huge bundle of nerve fibers called the corpus callosum. This bundle contains about 200 million axons. It is like a telephone cable connecting the 2 hemispheres, allowing them to communicate and share information. Without the corpus callosum, the 2 hemispheres would work independently and create behavioral conflicts. If you look at the brain, you notice it has a wrinkled appearance. It is not smooth. The surface is folded into ridges and grooves. The ridges are called gyri, and the grooves are called sulci. These folds serve an important purpose. They greatly increase the surface area of the cerebrum. If you unfolded the cerebrum and laid it completely flat, it would cover an area of about 1 square meter. So a lot of brain tissue is packed into a small space inside your skull. The cerebral cortex is the outer covering of the cerebral hemisphere. It is a layer of cells that covers the brain like a thin jacket. It is only 2 to 4 millimeters thick, but it is packed with millions of neurons. This layer is where most of your conscious processing happens. The cerebral cortex is called gray matter. Why gray? Because it looks grayish in color. This grayish color comes from the fact that neuron cell bodies are concentrated here. Neuron cell bodies are grayish in color. The dendrites and unmyelinated axons are also concentrated in the gray matter. These structures lack the white myelin sheath, which is why the region appears gray rather than white. In contrast, the inner part of the cerebral hemisphere contains mostly myelinated axons, which are white in color. This region is called white matter. These white myelinated axons form fiber tracts that connect different brain regions together. They carry signals between the different parts of the brain. So the cerebral cortex is where the neuron cell bodies are concentrated. This is an area of very high neuron density. The neurons are organized into distinct layers with different types of neurons in different layers. This layering contributes to the brain's functional organization. In the cerebral cortex, there are different regions with different functions. First, there are motor areas. The motor cortex controls your voluntary movements. When you decide to move your hand or walk, the motor cortex in your brain generates the commands that are sent to your muscles through the spinal cord and nerves. The primary motor cortex is located in the frontal lobe of the brain. Second, there are sensory areas. The sensory cortex receives and processes sensory information. When you see something, the visual cortex processes that visual information. When you hear something, the auditory cortex processes that sound. When you feel something, the somatosensory cortex processes that touch or pain sensation. Different sensory modalities are processed in different regions of the cortex. Third, and most importantly, there are association areas. These are large regions of the cerebral cortex that are not purely sensory or motor. They have more complex functions. They integrate sensory information with memories and experiences. They are responsible for higher order processing. The association areas do several things. They combine sensory information from different modalities. For example, when you eat an apple, the visual cortex sees the color, the taste areas taste the flavor, but the association areas combine all these sensations into a unified perception of apple. Association areas are also responsible for memory, language, and emotion. These are the areas that make us intelligent and conscious. The association areas are much more developed in humans than in other animals. This is why humans can think, use language, reason, remember complex ideas, and engage in sophisticated social interactions. The association areas are what make humans unique. They are the biological basis of human intelligence and culture. The inner part of the cerebral hemisphere consists of white matter. Remember, we said white matter contains myelinated axons. These white myelinated fibers form tracts that connect different regions of the brain. They carry signals between different brain areas, integrating information and coordinating brain function. Now, the thalamus is a very important structure. It is located deep inside the brain, beneath the cerebral cortex. The thalamus is relatively small, about the size of a walnut, but it is very important. The thalamus has a very important job. It is a major coordinating center for sensory and motor signaling. Think of it as the brain's central telephone switchboard. Sensory information comes in, and the thalamus decides where it should go. Motor information comes from the cortex, and the thalamus routes it to the appropriate destination. Most importantly, the thalamus relays sensory information. Almost all sensory information, visual, auditory, touch, temperature, pain, passes through the thalamus on its way to the cerebral cortex. The only exception is smell, which goes directly to the cortex without passing through the thalamus. The thalamus sorts all this sensory information and routes it to the correct areas of the cortex for processing. Another very important part of the forebrain is the hypothalamus. It is very small, about the size of a pea, but do not let its size fool you. The hypothalamus is extremely important. It lies at the base of the thalamus and contains centers for controlling many vital functions. The hypothalamus contains a temperature regulation center. This center constantly monitors your body temperature and works to keep it at about 37 degrees Celsius. When you are too hot, it makes you sweat to cool down. When you are too cold, it makes you shiver to generate heat. Temperature regulation is essential because your enzymes only work properly at the correct temperature. The hypothalamus also contains hunger and satiety centers. Satiety means fullness. These centers generate the sensation of hunger when you need food and the sensation of fullness when you have eaten enough. By controlling these sensations, the hypothalamus regulates your eating behavior and your caloric intake. Similarly, the hypothalamus contains a thirst center that generates the sensation of thirst. When your body loses water or when blood osmolarity becomes too high, the thirst center makes you feel thirsty and drives you to drink water. This maintains your water balance. The hypothalamus also contains neurosecretory cells. These are special neurons that do not just transmit signals like regular neurons, they produce hormones. These neurosecretory cells produce releasing hormones that control the pituitary gland, which is the master gland of the endocrine system. Through these releasing hormones, the hypothalamus controls the entire endocrine system. State integration of the nervous system and endocrine system through the hypothalamus is called the hypothalamic pituitary axis. It is the primary way that the nervous system controls the endocrine system. The hypothalamus releases releasing hormones which stimulate the pituitary to release its hormones, which in turn control other endocrine glands. This is how the body coordinates both rapid nervous responses and slower endocrine responses into a unified control system. Now let's talk about the limbic system. The limbic system is not a single structure but a group of interconnected structures located deep within the brain. The main structures include the amygdala and the hippocampus. The limbic system is sometimes called the emotional brain because it is very involved in emotions. Together with the hypothalamus, the limbic system regulates sexual behavior and reproductive drives. It generates the motivation for mating and influences sexual behavior. The limbic system generates and expresses emotions. When you feel excited or pleased or happy, that is the limbic system at work. When you feel angry or enraged, that is the limbic system. When you feel afraid or scared, that is the limbic system generating that emotion. But emotions are not just feelings in the brain. When you have an emotion, your whole body responds. Your heart rate changes, your blood pressure changes, you might start sweating. These are autonomic nervous system responses triggered by the limbic system. The emotion affects your whole body, not just your brain. The limbic system also generates motivation. It drives you to do things. Basic motivations like hunger and thirst are generated partly by the limbic system. But higher motivations too, the desire for social connection, the desire to achieve, the desire for knowledge. The limbic system is involved in all of these motivations through a reward system that reinforces certain behaviors. The midbrain is located in the middle of the brain, between the forebrain above and the hindbrain below. It is a relatively small structure compared to the forebrain and hindbrain, but it has important functions. A canal called the cerebral aqueduct passes through the midbrain. This canal is part of the ventricular system of the brain and carries cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid is a protective fluid that cushions the brain and spinal cord. The dorsal or back part of the midbrain contains 4 rounded structures called the corpora quadrigemina. These are 4 little bumps on the back of the midbrain. The upper 2 are called the superior colliculi and they process visual information. The lower 2 are called the inferior colliculi and they process auditory information. The hindbrain is the rear or posterior part of the brain. It consists of 3 main parts, the pons, the cerebellum and the medulla oblongata. The hindbrain controls many basic functions necessary for survival. The pons consists mainly of fiber tracts. The word pons actually means bridge, which describes its function perfectly. The pons is a bridge that interconnects different regions of the brain. It contains fibers that go up toward the higher brain regions and fibers that come down from the higher brain regions. The pons also helps control breathing. The medulla oblongata is the lowest part of the brain. It is connected directly to the spinal cord. The medulla is the most primitive part of the brain. Evolutionary, it was the first part of the brain to evolve. The medulla contains vital centers that control essential life functions. The respiratory center controls your breathing. The cardiovascular center controls your heart rate and blood pressure. The medulla also controls gastric secretions and swallowing. These are all automatic functions that the medulla takes care of without you thinking about them. If the medulla is damaged, these vital functions can stop, which is why medulla damage can be fatal. The cerebellum is located in the back of your brain, below the cerebrum. It is the
Me eat, act, and you study way. Upload your textbook, get summaries in a flash. Practice exams, flashcards, make your knowledge last. AI power boost for every ambitious mind. All in seconds, leave the stress behind. In labs here, yeah, you know the